everybody, and welcome to Weight Loss Wednesday. I'm Chef AJ, the author of Unprocessed and the Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, now available in German as Das Erfolgsrezept für ultimatives Abnehmen. And this is where I show you recipes for healthy, permanent, and sustainable weight loss. And today I'm doing a recipe from a cookbook of my dear friend Jocelyn Grafe called The Low-Fat Herbivore. You may want to follow her on YouTube now because she has a channel and she's doing so many of her delicious recipes. I got this book years ago and I have made so many recipes on it and based some of my recipes on it with her permission, including the black bean mushroom chili. The recipe I'm doing today is called Lemony Artichoke Soup from page 135, and you already have this recipe if you follow me on YouTube, because you may know that I've been doing interviews 1 to 3 a day with interesting people since the sheltering in place started, and she was one of the first people I interviewed, and she gave me permission to write out the recipe on the YouTube page. I'm going to show you how I make the recipe because honestly I never follow anybody's recipes, even my own. I was one of those kids in school that always colored outside the lines, and I encourage you to do that as well. Make the food taste good to you. Now, of course, baking is different. I don't encourage you to bake outside the lines. Baking is a science, so you would want to follow a recipe. But with cooking, it's an art form, so do what you like. I love Jocelyn's recipes because they are low fat, they don't contain any oil, and when she uses salt, she says to taste, which is how it should be. Again, always follow the least restrictive program you can that will get you the results that you seek. Now, in her recipe, she said simmer everything for 40 minutes. Well, who's got 40 minutes? I hardly ever do anything on the stove. Ever since I got my first Instant Pot, I pretty much cook everything in the Instant Pot, and if it can't be cooked in the Instant Pot, well, I probably don't make it. So normally when I make this recipe, I throw everything in, but with the sheltering at home, I have a little more time, so I decided to saute the onions and mushrooms first. Now, let me tell you, 99% of the times that I've ever made any recipe in the Instant Pot, I have thrown everything in, and I designed all the recipes in my book so that you can do that as well. But if you have a little time, and by a little time I mean like an additional half hour, because that's how long it takes in the Instant Pot, you can saute your onions and mushrooms so you can get that nice brown caramelized look. Now, the reason I did this with this recipe is, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a picky eater. If it's a whole natural food, I'll eat it. I've never been a fan of mushrooms. I know how good they are for you. So when I saute them, it makes it a little easier for me to eat than when they're not quite as cooked. And again, by saute, I just mean push the saute button on the Instant Pot. You don't need oil, you don't need anything. If it starts to stick a tiny bit, a tablespoon of water here and there. But I have already extended videos on this YouTube page showing you how to caramelize an onion without water, so I feel I didn't need to do that right now. But again, 99% of the time I make this, I throw everything in. So I've got my onions and mushrooms that have already been sauteed. I've got my water that's pre-measured out. Now, in her book, she calls for broth. And it's true that you can get low sodium and perhaps even no sodium vegetable broth, but I am cheap and I just can't see paying $2, $3, $4 for a box that's going to have packaging. I'm going to be honest, I have done side-by-side recipes of my recipes, cooking some in broth and some in water. Nobody could tell the difference, because if you have a good recipe, you really don't need broth. Now, it's different if you're drinking it. I drink something called pot liquor every morning, the leftover water from when I steam my husband's greens, and of course it tastes way different than water. But in a recipe where you're putting flavorful ingredients and spices, honestly, I've never been able to tell a difference between broth and water, and it's so expensive. You know, one of my recipes, the nutrient-rich black bean soup, calls for 12 cups of broth or water. Could you imagine? That would be almost $12 just for the broth. So, I mean, you can make your own easily out of scraps. I've got a recipe in my book and I've showed you on YouTube, but for me, I just use water because water is basically free. But if you like broth, and you don't mind the packaging, feel free to use that as well. So Jocelyn's recipe called for 2 potatoes. Well, that's not enough potatoes for me. So this is actually 3 large potatoes. But again, you are welcome to follow her recipe to the T. I'll give you that one as well. But I tend to like my soups more like soup, a combination of soup and stew. So that's why I'm putting in more potatoes. Or similarly, you could probably put in less water. I also, you may notice, cut them very large. I did that for a couple reasons, because while potatoes don't usually disintegrate the way sweet potatoes do in a soup, I like things a little bit more toothsome, so I like big chunks. And sometimes I forget to release the pressure, and sometimes this will sit here for hours cooking. So that's why I like big chunks. By the way, I just want to let you know I'm a fan of convenience, and a lot of people complain about the plastic, but I will reuse these, trust me, either to store things or to use as pet waste bags. But I just use the 10-ounce bag of mushrooms and the 10-ounce bag of onions. It's so much easier, and it's exactly the right amount, but feel free to do it any way you like. And again, from Trader Joe's, I used I believe it's a 12-ounce bag of artichokes. I prefer these frozen ones to the canned because I don't like cans. Cans have sharp edges, at least the artichoke one does, that pets could hurt themselves with in the trash can. And also these don't have any salt, which I prefer. And I defrosted them and I cut them in a little bit so that they weren't huge. And I'm going to put that in as well. And now, Jocelyn said salt to taste. I haven't used salt in many years, but what you can do, and this is a trick in many of my recipes, is one of the things that she calls for in her recipe is lemon juice, but I'm going to add that afterwards. I never cook with non-dairy, dairy, or citrus, so I'm going to add the lemon juice when it finishes. But I love adding sun-dried tomatoes. This is a 3-ounce bag, and I like to cut them small or buy them cut small so that they disperse better. These have no oil or salt, and what's really cool is this 3-ounce serving of sun-dried tomatoes came from 4 pounds of tomatoes, and while it certainly doesn't have any salt in it, the concentration of the tomato flavor, it just fools your palate, makes you think it's salty, and they have a nice little chewy texture, and I find they go great in this soup, especially because one of the ingredients she calls for in the soup is basil or basil. She didn't say how much, and I asked her how much. She said as little or as much as you want. My philosophy is you can always add, but you can't take away, so I'll just add 1 tablespoon. And you know what? If that's not enough, I can add more later. What I really like doing is adding fresh to it at the end, but I don't have any right now, so I'll probably add some other fresh herb or green to it. And so now I'm going to close the pressure cooker. Remember, you always think of this as a clock. If you put it at 11 o'clock, it closes easily. You put it on sealing, and then I'm going to use the manual button because that's the only one I know. 6 minutes, and then it's going to take a moment to do that little beep that it does. Aren't you going to beep? Come on. I think that beep just means, is you sure this is what you want, lady? Yep. So we're going to come back in a little bit more than 6 minutes because it's going to take a few minutes to come up to pressure. How soon it comes up to pressure will depend on the temperature of the liquid. In this case, I was using room temperature water. It would go much faster with boiling water, and also how full the unit is. But even if it took 20 minutes, who cares? Because I can do something else while it's coming up to pressure. If you don't have a pressure cooker, please consider getting one. I know so many people that buy them and keep them in the box. They're afraid of them. I have 4 of them. I travel with them. I just can't imagine living life without it. And my favorite one is the 8-quart because you can always do a small recipe in a big one, but you can't do a big one in a small one. So as soon as this comes up to pressure, I'll show you how to finish the soup. Take 2. I forgot an ingredient. This was not listed in Jocelyn's recipe, but I add this to every recipe, whether it's called for or not, and that's garlic. I buy these bags at Trader Joe's that are peeled, and I use the whole bag. I use this cool little tool from Tupperware you can find on my Amazon store. As many tools as you want. And it's so easy to get finely minced garlic. As I mentioned, especially because I don't use salt, it's really important that I use flavor. And garlic and onion are probably the 2 most important things. So it's okay, the pressure cooker just started, so I'm gonna add this now. And again, if you don't like garlic, you don't have to, but man, onion and garlic to me are just essentials, especially in SOS-free cooking. So I can just put this lid back down, and when it's done, I'll show you what it looks like. So welcome back. It took about 30 minutes for it to come up to pressure, but I got really busy, and so now you can see by this LED readout that it's been 1 hour and 50 minutes since it came up to pressure, which means I don't have to release the pressure. It's come down to pressure naturally. So before I open the lid to the Instant Pot and show you what it looks like, I wanted to tell you something about last week's episode of Weight Loss Wednesday where I made the blueberry oat groats. I wanted to see what would happen if I dehydrated them, and so I took some of them and I put it in my Breville, which is an air fryer, an oven, and it's also a dehydrator. And what happened is it made Rice Krispies. This is the coolest, most delicious, crunchy cereal, and this is made from the oat groats that I showed you last week. So if you have a dehydrator, this might be a fun thing for you to try. Couldn't show it last week because I hadn't thought about it. So now that it is done, let's see. I'm surprised there's still a little bit of pressure to come out even after all that time. So now I'm going to open the lid. Always make sure you put it on one of these handles. And then I am going to stir it up. Oh man, this looks delicious. And when you do saute the onion and the mushroom first, the soup will have this darker brown color, and so will the potatoes. If you don't, then it's going to have a more clear broth color. So it's really up to you. And again, if you feel like you need more liquid, add more liquid. If less, you can always put less in, but you do need some liquid to cook with the Instant Pot. And then her recipe calls from the juice of 2 lemons. So I'm going to pour that in now and mix it in. And for me, you know, when you use citrus, vinegar, lemon juice, it creates a salty flavor so that you sometimes don't miss the salt because your taste buds for sour sit right next to the taste buds for salt. But if you use salt, always add it at the finish. Don't cook with it because it dissipates. And if you like Benson's Table Tasty, that would be great. And here I'm going to show you some of the ways I season it. So I'm just going to take this nice, delicious, hearty soup. And the way I will eat it, I'm not hungry right now, so I got this weird habit of only eating when I'm hungry. But one of the things I like to do is always add more greens to my food. So I would probably put, if I had fresh basil, I would put fresh basil on top, but I don't. This is Italian parsley. And when we actually eat this tonight for dinner, I'm going to stir in some arugula. I don't like to cook with the greens because they get too mushy. But when it's hot, just throwing some in either the whole pressure cooker or your individual bowl is very good. And I should have showed you this before, but I used 3 potatoes, and the potatoes I used were about this size. They were about a pound or a little more than a pound. And one of the things I always do is cook grains and have them left over both in the refrigerator and freezer. This is my multi-grain blend, which I'm going to show you in an upcoming episode. So I'll be putting some grain in there to make it even more hearty. And some of the seasonings that I like to use on my food, I've showed you in previous recipes. I always keep a shaker of Kathy Hester's DIY favorite salt-free seasoning, which is delicious on all your food and this. And I always have some of the Enlightened Faux Parmesan as well. So I hope you'll try this recipe, and if you try it, let me know what you think. And thank you so much, Jocelyn Grafe, the low-fat herbivore, for letting me do your recipe, lemony artichoke soup, on page 135. Take care, everyone. I'm Chef AJ, and I truly believe you can have both the health and the body you so richly deserve. And can't wait to eat this.